Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
So I'm going to start continuation to my previous class. If anybody has any problem with audio or video, they can alert me. Okay. So yesterday we were using. I taught you Reynolds transport theorem, how to apply it for continuity equation and momentum equation. But we can also apply this Reynolds transport theorem uh, for continuity equation. Okay, so in this case, uh, the extensive property, that is equal to capital E, that is nothing but amount of energy in the fluid system. So from thermodynamics first law, so the amount of heat given to the system is equal to the amount of energy in the fluid system plus the work done by the system on its surroundings. Okay, so H is the energy supplied to the fluid system, and the amount of energy in the fluid system after it worked on its surroundings, that is equal to E. So here E is the extensive property, then its intensive property B is equal E per unit mass. So that is represented by small e. So small e is equal EU plus half E square plus GZ, where U is equal internal energy and half E square is kinetic energy per unit mass, and GZ is equal potential energy per unit mass. Okay, so when you substitute that beta in Reynolds transport theorem, then we'll get energy equation. Okay, so the amount of energy in the rate of change of energy in the fluid system, that is equal to d by dt of uh, volume integral of u plus half e square plus gz rho plus area integral of du plus half e square plus gz into rho v. So this is the equation used for energy balance. Okay, so now you know continuity equation, momentum equation, and energy equation in integral form. So these are applied in this subject. Okay, in this course, and time to time whenever we require to apply this equation, uh, we will know how to use this. Okay, so in hydrological cycle, okay, the water is converted when it is moving from land, oceans to atmosphere and back to land, and then also from atmosphere it goes to poles. Okay, so here water changing its phases. Okay, from ocean when it evaporates, it becomes steam. Okay, then from the clouds when they condense, the vapor becomes liquid, and in cold regions like poles, when these clouds condense, that becomes snow. Okay, so there the vapor is converted to snow. So you can see, you observe that water is changing from one phase to other while transported from land to atmosphere and atmosphere to land and to oceans. So you see, then uh, even the evaporation takes place in poles region. Okay, so the ice becomes vapor. So for that, it requires latent heat of fusion, that is equal to 0.33 into 10 power 6 joule per kg. So this latent heat is obtained from solar energy. Similarly, on the land or in the oceans, when evaporation takes place, the water is at atmospheric temperature, but it takes energy from sun, then it becomes vapor. Okay, so for that, uh, the energy required is, that is called the latent heat of vaporization. So that is equal to 2.5 to 10 power 6 joule per kg. And when heat energy is transferred, okay, from one location to other, the transportation uh, takes place in three methods or three ways. One is the first one is conduction, then convection, and third one is radiation. So how the energy transport takes place in conduction? Because the molecules, okay, the molecules at higher energy are at high temperature, they move to low temperature. So and then during this collision, the energy from this high energy molecules transfer to low energy molecules, so that the heat energy transfer takes place. So this is conduction, okay. And this conduction, one example of conduction is, suppose a rod of a steel rod, if you one end you hold it and other end if you put it in flames, then slowly you will feel the heat at the other side. You will feel the hot. I mean higher temperature and temperature increasing with time. Okay, so this is nothing but conduction. So this for this Fourier, he surprised. I mean, he hold a steel rod and one end he hold it and he hold it and other end he put it in the flame. Then he observed that heat transfer is taking place in a steel rod. So he extensively he did experiments on this phenomena. Then he has given an equation, that is Fourier law of heat conduction, that is Qx is equal minus k dt by dx. Okay, so conduction mainly takes place due to the gradient. Okay, because when the heat or temperature transferred from one end to other, because there is a temperature gradient, that is dt by dx. Okay, the qx is, that's a heat flux. Heat flux is nothing but the rate, I mean the uh, transfer of the flux through unit area. So that is heat flux qx, and k is the thermal conductivity, because this is for energy conduction, whereas Fick's law, that is for mass conduction. So in a bucket of water, if you apply some dye or some contaminant, then the contaminant spreads within the bucket, although there is no flow taking place. Why this contaminant is spreading? That is because of Fick's law. Because when the place where we added the contaminant, it has got higher concentration. Okay, or and at other places there is no contamination or little contamination. So there is a contamination gradient. So that contamination gradient drives the flow of contaminant spreading. Okay, so this is a conduction of mass. Similarly, a conduction for momentum. So in fluid flow, especially in laminar flow, the momentum transfer takes place through conduction. So in laminar flows, the tau, which is nothing but shear stress, this is also called as shear stress, has got same units as momentum. Okay, this is nothing but momentum transfer in vertical plane. So tau is equal mu into dou u by dou j. So there also, since there is a velocity gradient across the depth, so therefore the momentum is transferred from from high velocity to low velocity areas. So that is given by this equation, tau is equal mu into du by dj. Similarly, convection. Convection, uh, in fluid flow, the convection takes place due to the turbulence. Okay, turbulence is eddies. Suppose a water is flowing in a canal or stream or river. If the velocity is high, what happens? There is a lot of mixing is taking place. Okay, there are a lot of eddies. Okay, eddy means it is kind of a vortices. So these eddies enhance the mixing. So that is called as convection. So that is given by, this is a similar equation to the conduction, that is tau is equal rho km du by dz, where km is called eddy viscosity. In the previous conduction, tau is equal mu du by dz, where mu is the viscosity of the fluid, that is the fluid property, that is nothing to do with the turbulence. But here in turbulent flow, tau is equal rho km du by dz, where km is called as eddy viscosity. So eddy viscosity is the function of flow. Okay, because of the high velocity of the flow, this eddy viscosity uh, develops, and it is very significant, and it is much higher than the kinematic viscosity. So due to this eddies, there is a mixing, so that either contaminant or heat energy, whatever, it is transferred from one location to other. Uh, since in hydrological cycle, what I mean, this hydrological cycle, the main driving force which transfer the energy, or which drives, I mean, energy from one location to other, that is wind. So the wind is a turbulent fluid flow phenomena. So to find out how this evaporation or other processes, how they are influenced by this wind velocity, we need to know the velocity profile of the wind. So that is approximated by logarithmic law. So that is given here, u by u star is equal 1 by kappa log g by g naught. This kappa is a universal constant. It is given by von Karman. He is a famous physicist. And the z is, this is the location coordinate. Okay, the vertical coordinate of a point where we are interested to find u. U star is called as the shear velocity or friction velocity. So this represents the friction, and for given velocity profile, this u star is constant. Okay, and z naught, so this represents the surface roughness. So shear velocity, which represents the friction, is computed as square root of tau naught by rho, where tau naught is the shear stress at the bed, rho is the mass density of the fluid, and we can find the velocity gradient. Okay, so the velocity gradient du by dz is equal, when we differentiate this, we'll get this u star by kappa z. Kappa is a, as I said, is universal constant, and its value is 0.41. So here there is a numerical problem. Okay, a wind speed as measured at 2 meters as 3 meter per second above a grass field, where the g naught, okay, or z naught, which represents roughness height, that is equal 1 centimeter, and we need to plot the velocity profile and calculate the rates of laminar and turbulent momentum fluxes at 20 centimeters, and we need to also compute the turbulent momentum flux at 2 meters elevation. So these constants are given: mass density of air, that is equal to 1.2 kg per meter cube, and kinematic viscosity of air, that is given as 1.5 into 10 power 5 minus 5 meters square per second, and this km, eddy viscosity, is given as 1.5 meters square per second. Okay, so now we know this equation: u by star, u by u star equal 1 by kappa log g by g naught. So in this, at one location, that is at the height of 2 meters above the ground surface, velocity is measured as 3 meter per second. So in this equation, we don't know u star. Okay, but u is known at z is equal 2 meter, that is 3 meter per second. So when we apply those things, we'll get u star value, that is given as 0.226 meter per second. Now plot the velocity profile. Okay, next question is plot the velocity profile. So because that flow total depth is see here, because the atmospheric bone layer that is kilometers of height, okay, but we can integrate this equation up to 4 meters, okay. So we can take the g value at fixed interval, that is depends on our choice, okay. So we can take every 20 centimeters interval or 50 centimeters, etc. So for the, if suppose if we take 20 centimeters, then 0, 0.2, zero point 0.4, zero point 0.6, 0.8 and up to 4.0, those are the vertical coordinates. And we know u star value, kappa value, z naught value, and we know we know z value, so we can get u value. When we plot, we'll get this kind of velocity profile, okay, where on x-axis we are plotting u and y-axis we are plotting elevation. And here they also, in this question, is also asked to find uh, shear stress, okay, at locations, shear stress at because shear stress is nothing but momentum, turbulent momentum transfer. So this turbulent momentum flux rates we need to calculate at 20 centimeters, okay. So du by dz is equal u star by kappa z. At 20 centimeter, that value comes out to be 2.83. Then we can calculate the rate of change of momentum, or rate of transfer of momentum. That is called rho nu du by dz. So we already computed du by dz. And nu is equal given as 1.5 into 10 power minus 5. Rho is 1.2, so we can get tau is equal 5.1 into 10 power minus 5. Similarly, we can get this is for laminar flow, and for turbulent flow, no, this is a turbulent flow. So this here the this is laminar momentum flux, okay, and for turbulent momentum flux we have to use this formula rho km du by dz. So where km is given as 1.5 and du by dz we have computed 2.83, then you get tau turbulent is 5.1 Newton per meter square. So we can see now the turbulent momentum flux. Just let us compare turbulent momentum flux and laminar momentum flux. So laminar momentum flux is 5.1 into 10 power minus 5, whereas turbulent momentum flux is 5.1 Newton per meter square. So we can see that turbulent momentum flux is 10 power 5 times and 1 lakh times of laminar momentum flux. So that means what this says that uh, in atmospheric flows, since the flow is turbulent, the convection is much stronger than the conduction, because this is conduction equation, this is convection equation. So convection is much stronger. So in turbulent flows, the momentum transfer takes place mainly due to the convection. So this is the radiation, okay. So this is the earth, and this is incoming radiation from the sun. This is also called incident radiation. So earth, when this incident when the radiation hits the earth surface, partly it is reflected and partly it is absorbed. And once, I mean, out of the absorbed radiation, part of it again emitted back, okay. So this reflection, this reflected quantity, that is equal to some constant times incident radiation, that is alpha Ri. This alpha, how strong the reflection, then that alpha represents that. Suppose water bodies, they absorb so most of the sun radiation, okay, they don't reflect much, so alpha is very small, that is 0.06 or something like that. Whereas the snow surface, it doesn't absorb much, it reflects most of it, so the alpha is 0.97. And the observed, suppose this earth surface, if you look at it, the observed radiation, that is equal to 1 minus alpha into Ra, because Ra minus alpha Ra, that is 1 minus alpha Ra, out of which Re is emitted. So the net radiation observed is equal Rn is equal 1 minus alpha Ra minus Re. This emitted radiation, how much radiation is emitted? So for that, Stephen Boltzmann has given an equation that is equal to emitted radiation is equal E sigma T power 4. So E is a constant, that is called emissivity. So if emissivity is very high, that means emitting radiation is very high. And this emitting radiation, it has a wavelength and frequency. The wavelength of emitted radiation is function of the surface temperature. Okay, so the wavelength of emitted radiation is equal 2.9 into 10 power minus 3 by T. That means, suppose the surface temperature is very high, then wavelength of emitted radiation is small. If the surface temperature is low, then the wavelength of emitted radiation will be very high. So if you look at sun is the temperature is very high. So the radiation coming from the sun, its wavelength is very small. So it is called as short radiation. It is called as short wave radiation. It is represented by RS. And when radiation, when it comes and hits the Earth's surface, in the no, when the radiation emitted from the sun, it travels through the atmosphere. But atmosphere has aerosols. Aerosols means they are small particles of dust or contaminant. And when these sun radiation, when it hits the aerosols, it is reflected. Partly it is reflected towards space and partly reflected towards the earth. Okay, so this radiation is called as this is nothing but scattered radiation. So this is called as a long wave radiation. So finally, net radiation in earth surface is equal Rs plus Rl into 1 minus alpha minus Re. Whereas RS is the short wave radiation, it is directly coming from the sun. RL is this is the scattered radiation from the aerosols, that is RL. This is called as long wave radiation. And if you look at, because this radiation is very important in hydrological cycle, because the most of the energy for the hydrological cycle is obtained from the radiation. So if you look at this figure, the incoming solar radiation is 100 units, okay, out of which uh, 19 units is absorbed by the atmosphere, and 51 units is absorbed by the earth. Okay, remaining is 30 units. Okay, 51 plus this 19, so that is 70. So remaining 30 units, that 30 units goes back to the space by these mechanisms. So okay, 6 units is backscattered by air and 20 units deflected by the clouds, and this is the reflected by the surface. Okay, that is 4 units. So you can see that out of 100 units coming onto the earth, only 4 units is going back uh, as a reflected. So you can find alpha is equal 0.04 here. And see now, this ocean and lands, that is earth, so that is absorbed 51 units. So out of the 51 units, 23 units is given to evaporation. Okay, because water is being evaporated from lakes, rivers, and from surface moisture, trees, and as well as from sea. So the energy given it for these evaporation from these bodies, so that is given, that is 23%. So out of 51, 23% is gone for this, and the 7% gone for sensibly heat flux. Okay, this is for heating the immediate atmosphere. Then there is a 21 remaining 21 units is there. So these 21 units is gone back to this is absorbed by water vapor and CO2 in the atmosphere. So finally, you see, finally the total of 51 plus this 19, that is totally 70 units. So that 70 units again going back to the space as a long wave. So you can see that 23 coming from here, then it takes also other 3 from other sources, then gone back here 26. Okay, and whatever the radiation absorbed by CO2 water vapor, again it's gone back as a 38%. Okay, and 6% of radiation from Earth, that's again going back to space. So this is the radiation balance. So this is with first chapter. Now I'm going to start second chapter. Okay, so I'm going to share the next lecture. Okay, uh, can you see the PowerPoint presentation on atmospheric water?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Okay,
sir.
okay, okay, great, nice, okay, okay. So now I'm going to uh, explain this atmospheric water. Okay. See, we know that evaporation takes place from oceans and land surfaces, and this evaporated water vapor, it is transported near Earth to the atmosphere, high altitude atmosphere, and these again clouds, they move from one location to other location. Then this vapor, it condenses. Okay, so this entire process needs energy, and some driving forces are required for this hydrological cycle to happen. So there are two important forces. Okay, one is rotation of the earth, and second one is the transfer of heat energy. So these are the main two important forces. Okay, because these forces uh, influence the wind flow and as well as the energy transfer from one location to other location. So you know that Earth receives solar radiation, and out of 100 units, it absorbs 51 units, and these 51 units at later point of time again transferred back to the space. So this is called as back radiation or re-radiation. So in this process, so average rate of radiation is equal to 210 watt per meter square. Okay, so on a unit area, the average rate of radiation is 210 watt per meter square. See, this is the Earth. Okay, the Earth, and this is the equator that divides this circle into two semicircles. Okay, here the equator, and you see the solar radiation, it hits the regions at the equator in perpendicular degree. Okay, so at 90 degree, the sun rays hits the equator, and as the latitude increases, these sun rays hits at oblique angle. Okay, so but we know that when these sun rays hits at 90 degree, maximum energy is transferred to the earth, but when they hit the earth at oblique angle, the decrease, I mean, small amount of energy is transferred. So this figure shows that, see, on the equator, uh, for unit area, the amount of solar energy obtained is 270, or transferred is 270 watt per meter square. whereas at the poles it is only 90 watt per meter square. Uh, so you can see that this is the contours of solar energy on its surface. You can see that this is the equator region where the maximum solar energy is concentrated, whereas on both sides of the poles, on both sides of equator, that is, I mean, poles, the lesser solar energy is transferred. So this is the absorbed solar energy. This is the latitude 0. Equator has equator latitude is 0, whereas pole's latitude is 90 degree. You know that there are uh, two definitions. One is latitude and longitude. These latitude and longitude are required to locate a place on Earth. Okay, these are nothing but coordinates, latitude, longitude. Latitude is these horizontal lines on the globe. If you look at a globe, this latitude is horizontal lines, whereas longitude is vertical lines. Okay, so this longitude gives the time zones. You see that equator has a 0 latitude, so at the equator the maximum solar energy is observed. Okay, that is, as I said, 270 watt per meter square, whereas at the poles least solar energy is observed, and in between equator and poles there is a lesser and lesser. As we move from equator to poles, there is a decrease in observable solar energy, and this is the emitted solar energy back to the space. Okay, and this emitted solar energy, it is function of the earth temperature. Although the maximum solar energy is absorbed at equator, the average temperature of earth is almost constant. Okay, there is not much variation in the average surface temperature of average temperature of earth. So therefore this emitted radiation, so that is almost constant. Okay, from equator to the poles, but whereas absorbed energy is much higher near the equator. So there is a transfer of energy from equator to the poles, and this transfer of energy that drives the winds. Okay, this atmospheric circulation is driven by the this what we can say, this variation in the absorbed energy from equator to the poles. So more energy is absorbed near the equator than emitted. So there is a surplus energy here, and there is a, we can say, shortage of energy at the poles. So you can see that there is a surplus radiation at the equator and a radiation deficit at the poles. So due to this surplus and deficit of solar energy on the earth acts like a heat engine. Okay, the energy is transferred from equator to the poles, and at an average rate of 4 into 10 power 9 megawatts. So this energy is transferred through winds and as well as ocean currents. See, since the solar radiation is high at the equator, the air near to the equator that that it heats up, and then it moves high. Okay, so what happens? The air at the equator because of the more available amount of solar energy there, it heats up quickly and then it moves up, because as air is warms up, it becomes lighter and lighter, so that it moves in the upward direction. So here the air moves in higher altitudes, it cools down, then it goes back to the poles. Okay, from the poles again, since the air is here, it is lifted up, so there is a low pressure region here, and here, since the air is coming back from the atmosphere to the earth, high pressure region here, so this is represented by H is high pressure region, this is low pressure region. So due to this low pressure region, again the wind is transferred from poles to the equator. So this vortex or this circulation is called as Hadley circulation or Hadley cell. Okay, so see, there are two poles and equator, and the wind is moved at the lower elevations near to the earth. Wind flows from poles to the equator, and at higher elevations, the wind flows from equator to the poles. Okay, in this circulation, the energy is transferred from equator to the poles. So this is a simple schematic, okay, where this is the equator region. At the equator region, due to the high temperature, air quickly heats up. It becomes warmer and lighter and lifted up. Then again, slowly, it loses its energy and moves back to the poles. And at the poles, it descends because as it loses energy and it cools down. So when it cools down, the cool air is higher mass. Okay, so therefore it comes back to the earth at the poles. So due to this downward flow of air, there is a high pressure zone is here, and at the equator, the air is lifted up, so there is a low pressure region. So due to this low pressure and high pressure, the wind moves from higher energy to lower energy. Okay, but you see, so that is shown here that this is a Hadley cell. Okay, but this problem is not as simple as that, because there is not only solar radiation. In addition to that, there is a earth rotation. Okay, so due to which, because this figure it shows without air rotation. If there is no air rotation, then only two Hadley cells in one hemisphere. Okay, so this perfectly applies to Venus, where it rotates very slow. But Earth rotates from west to east. Okay, because of that, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. So those due to the Earth rotation, there are much more. This Hadley cell divided into three parts. That I will come back. So for better understanding, these are different atmospheric layers. Okay, troposphere, that is near to the earth. Uh, so the troposphere, the uh, its thickness varies from equator to the poles. At the equator, it has got around 15 to 17 kilometers, whereas at poles it is like 7 kilometers. So the troposphere contains the atmosphere and the clouds formation, evaporation, this hydrological cycle that takes place in this troposphere. Okay, so above the troposphere, but the here the flow is very turbulent. Okay, so above the troposphere, that is about 10 kilometers, there is a stratosphere. It extends up to 50 kilometers. The stratosphere uh, it mainly contains ozone layer, okay, which stops ultraviolet radiation. hitting Earth. And this stratosphere, here the air pressure is very low, and flow is some kind of laminar flow here. So in between this troposphere and the stratosphere, there is a, this place is called as tropo pause, tropopause. Generally, the passenger flights they travel just above this tropo pause, because you see this troposphere is fully turbulent and the stratosphere is kind of a laminar. So just above this boundary, most of the passenger planes travel here because there is a less turbulence, so there is smooth ride. Above the stratosphere is mesosphere, so where this asteroids passing the Earth here. Then above that there is a thermosphere, and you see here, uh, you see this is the temperature variation. Okay, in the troposphere, as we go higher altitudes, the temperature is decreasing, and again there is a sharp gradient at the tropopause, and temperature is non-linearly increasing in the stratosphere. Okay, so and you see the pressure. The pressure is very less in the stratosphere, and the boundary between the stratosphere and mesosphere is called as the stratopause. At stratopause, the air pressure is only 0.1% of air pressure on the Earth. Okay, so here the air pressure is very low. This is called as Rarefield region. Okay, uh, and this there is a thermosphere. Here the temperatures are very high. Okay, so temperatures in the range of 500 degrees centigrade in thermosphere, and this thermosphere where this our satellites generally orbit here. So why I'm explaining these different atmospheric layers, because the hydrological cycle mainly takes place in the troposphere. Okay, and in between stratosphere and troposphere, there is a sharp gradients of pressure and temperature, due to which there is a wind flow here at this border, that is called as the jet streams. Okay, so these jet streams travel across thousands of kilometers. So mainly the clouds formation occurs in the troposphere. So whatever the evaporated water, that is in the troposphere, and there is the precipitation takes place. See, since Earth is rotating, uh, there is a Coriolis forces. So Coriolis forces, what is Coriolis force? Because uh, Earth is rotating, so it has got a angular velocity. The angular velocity is constant, but the linear velocity it differs. Okay, the linear velocity will be very high at the equator, and the linear velocity is very low near the poles. So due to this variation of the linear velocity, when winds blowing, they blow in a curved shape. Okay, so that is called as Coriolis effect. So I am going to, so due to this Coriolis effect, the Hadley cycle earlier, when if the Earth is not rotating, then there is only two Hadley cycles. But due to Coriolis forces, the Hadley cycle is broken into three small cells, and totally there are six Hadley cells in one hemisphere. So you can see that this is equator, and this is the poles. This is the poles here. So the Hadley cycle near to the equator is called uh, this is called as tropical. So this is called as a tropical Hadley cycle, whereas the Hadley cycle near the pole is called polar cell, and there in between there is a one more cell. See what happens here, near the equator, the warm air rises, then it flows towards the poles at higher altitude, but during this transport, it loses its energy and it cools down. Once it cools down, at around 30-degree altitude, it comes down to the earth, and due to the low pressure at the equator, again this wind goes back to the equator. Then again, due to high temperature here, it becomes warm and then goes up. Okay. Similarly, at the poles, what happens, because of this low pressure zone, the wind, because the poles are very cold, the temperatures will be less than minus 20 degrees centigrade at the poles. So there's a cool air, because when wind is blowing on surface, its temperature is relatively close to the ground surface. So here, because of the very cold surface here at the poles, the cool air, which is heavier, which is near to the earth, it flows towards the, but during this process, it heats up, okay, and at 60-degree latitude, again it's sufficiently warm, so that it goes up to the atmosphere, it lifted up, and then again it goes to the poles, because of the because it decreases its energy, and it's again lands near the pole, then again near to the land, it blows toward the equator. So these two are main driving cells, because of low pressure and high pressure, and as well as temperatures gradients. In between, there's another cycle, another cell. Okay, so this cell which forms between 30-degree to 60-degree latitude. So here, because how this forms is, because when this wind, it blows in the higher atmosphere towards the poles, it loses its energy, it cools down, then it comes back to the earth. So here it is bifurcated. So one part goes to here, one part goes to here. So then again, it starts going towards poles. Then at 60-degree latitude, because of the incoming winds from the poles, it goes up. Okay. So once it goes up, then again it blows towards the equator. So this is the intermediate cell. So these three cells, because they are very important, and these three cells, in like one fourth of this earth, or these six cells in one hemisphere, they drives the wind system. So you see, this is the rotation of the earth. So rotation of the earth takes place from west to east. Okay, this is the west and this is the east. So rotation of earth takes place. So due to this rotation of earth, because the linear velocity is varying. So suppose if wind is blowing in this northern direction, what happens? It curves and it goes on the right side. Similarly, suppose the wind is blowing in the northern hemisphere from north to south. If this is the direction wind is blowing, then it blows on its right side. Similarly, in the southern, but contrary, in the southern hemisphere, the wind curves on the left side. So here in the southern hemisphere, wind is blowing from south to north. So, but due to this linear velocity change, it blows on the left side. Similarly, here the wind is blowing from equator towards poles in the southern hemisphere. It goes on the left side, because this Coriolis effect is very important, because this drives the circulation pattern of cyclones. You see here, So you see here, this is the local. This is hurricanes in northern hemisphere. Okay, so at certain location there is a low pressure. So due to this low pressure, wind is driven here from north to south, from south to north. But due to the Coriolis effect, this wind takes right direction. Okay, so the wind is blowing in this. It should blow in this, but due to this Coriolis forces, it blows towards the right. So the curve towards right. Similarly here, the wind should blow from north to south, but due to the Coriolis force, the wind curves on the right side, and due to which there is a circulatory pattern because the air is gushing toward this low pressure, but due to these curvatures, there is a circulation, and this is in anti-clockwise direction. So always the cyclones in northern hemisphere, their rotational direction is anti-clockwise direction. Similarly, in the southern hemisphere, suppose there is a low pressure region, or due to which the air is blowing from equator to here and poles to here. But due to the Coriolis effect, it takes left side curvature. So therefore, the wind is blowing in this direction and in this direction. So due to this curved flow, there is a circulation, and that circulation is clockwise direction. So always the direction of cyclone in I mean the circulation direction in southern hemisphere is always clockwise. So you can see these two photographs. Okay, these are hurricanes. This is in northern hemisphere. This is in southern hemisphere. And in northern hemisphere, the circulation is taking place in counterclockwise direction, whereas in southern hemisphere, the circulation is taking place in clockwise direction. Similarly, so due to this Coriolis forces, and as well as this broken up Hadley's cell, okay, there are winds flow in different direction. They are classified as easterlies, westerlies, and trade winds. Okay, you see uh, near the poles. Okay, you see near the poles, the wind is blowing towards the equator, so therefore the wind is blowing towards equator. So the wind is blowing at north and east directions. Okay, so the wind is blowing, actually the wind should blow in this direction. Okay, but due to the Coriolis forces, it takes on left side. Okay, so therefore they they're curved like this. So these are called as easterlies. And so in between, because if you look at this Hadley cell, this is 0 degree latitude, and this is 30-degree latitude. Okay, so here again, near to the air, the flow is in the direction of equator, but due to the Coriolis effect, they are curved towards so they are blowing from northeastern direction. Okay, so they are called as trade winds here. Similarly, uh, in the southern hemisphere, these trade winds, because of the Coriolis forces, they flowing in the southeast direction. So they are called as southeast trades. And so these are called the trade winds. In between, there is a westerlies. Okay, so westerlies means this is due to this ferrule cell that is in between polar cell and Hadley cell. So in the ferrule cell, the wind is blowing towards, because this ferrule cell is in between 30-degree and 60-degree latitude. So here the wind is blowing in poles direction. Okay, so wind is to be blow in this direction, but due to the Coriolis forces, they turn towards right side. Okay, in northern hemisphere. So these are called as westerlies. Similarly, here in the southern hemisphere, wind is blowing towards the poles, so it should go in this direction, that straight downwards. But due to the Coriolis forces, they curve towards this is south and east. Okay, so these are called as westerlies. So these are the different types of winds. They mainly brings the precipitation. So this already I explained. Hadley circulation cell. At the equator, there is a low pressure. Then, due to the higher solar energy here, quickly that wind picks up. Then it lifted. When it goes to higher altitudes, okay, uh, it it goes towards poles, and during that it loses its energy, then it cools down, then comes back to air, so due to the high. And what happens, because this air, it holds moisture. Okay, and the moisture holding capacity increases with the temperature. So what happens, when the temperature, the air temperature is very high, so it throws out water molecules. I mean, condensation takes place. So when condensation takes place, that becomes rainfall. So you see, that's why at the along the equator, almost every day there is a rain, because in the afternoon time, the temperatures are very high near the air, so the wind is it holds a lot of vapor, and it lifted up, and then when it goes to higher elevations, then its much holding capacity decreases, so it condenses and rains. So in locations along the equator, almost there is a rainfall every day because of this phenomenon. So this is the rainfall distribution around the world. You can see that this is the equator, which is 0 degree latitude. Okay, so which passes through, you see that which passes through this Indonesia and Philippines, etc. So, and some places, Congo, etc., in Africa, and it will also go through the Amazon rainforest in Brazil. So you can see that this deep blue color, it indicates, so it's along the equator. Okay, so this is the, high rainfall region. So what happens when the air flows over surface? Its temperature is relative to the surface. Okay, so due to this temperature gradients, as I said, there are different kinds of winds: westerlies, easterlies, and all those things. Trade winds and doldrums, etc. So definitely, when the wind is blowing to a to an area, so that incoming wind, it can be either cold or hot. So suppose uh, at one location where at low pressure region, the air is coming from poles, that is cold air. Okay, so you can see, okay, you can see here, cold air is blowing above warm air. Okay, generally they don't mix. Okay, one flows above other, and there is a border line between this cold air and warm air, that is called as front. Okay, that is a layer between this cold air and warm air, that is a kind of a boundary. So what happens, this cold air, it is higher, and the warm air is lighter. So what happens, this warm air tries to go up, and the cold air tries to come down. You can see there is some kind of circulation pattern is developing here. So the cold air, which is pushing into this warm air. So that leading edge is called as cold front. Similarly, this warm air, it is pushing into cold air. That leading edge is called as warm front. And the cold air, generally, its velocity will be high because this is a low pressure region. So the air is blowing from poles. Okay, so that is coming with higher velocity. So therefore, this cold front, it is more sharper than this warm front. And since this cold air is got higher velocity, it tries to fill this low pressure region very quickly. Therefore, this cold front, okay, that goes closer and closer to the warm front, and at some instant, the region between this cold front and warm front that vanishes. That becomes this cold front collapses. Cold front and warm front, they collapses. This is called as occluded front. So you can see now when this happened, there is a complete circulation. So this is nothing but cyclone. So once this pressure increases, so there is no more low pressure region, then then what happens, the cyclone becomes cyclone weakens. Okay, that is shown in here. Again, the boundary is developing between warm end and cold air. So here in this figure, it clearly shows this is the warm front and this is the cold front. You can see the pressures. These are pressure contours. Okay, the pressure is low at the center of this circle, and the pressures are higher away from the this eye of this cyclone. So this is all about atmospheric circulation. So now I'm going to cover water vapor. So because why we need to study water vapor? Because this water vapor supplies the water required for rainfall. Okay, so we need to know. Suppose if we need to calculate how much rainfall going to occur at certain place, given the air temperature there and given the moisture content, etc. Then we can mathematically we can calculate how much precipitation. Of course, it will not be accurate because it is a very complicated phenomena, but still we can numerically calculate. So, so therefore, we need to study the water vapor. So these are some important definitions. Hydrological cycle. Hydrological cycle is the continuous transport of water from land to land and oceans to atmosphere, and from atmosphere again back to land and oceans and poles. Humidity. This is the water content in the air. Okay. Uh, there is a term called absolute humidity. This is nothing but water vapor density. So that is mass of water vapor in a fixed volume of air. Then this specific humidity is a kind of a ratio, that is mass of water vapor divided by total mass of moist air. That is the specific humidity. Uh, so this water mixing ratio, it is not required here. Uh, Actual vapor pressure. So this is the amount of pressure exerted by the water vapor molecules. Then saturation vapor pressure. This is the pressure exerted by the water vapor which is saturated at a given temperature. So again, this is a better explanation. Humidity, the amount of water in the air. So humidity is again we can specify either absolute humidity or specific humidity. So absolute humidity means mass of water vapor by volume of air. You can see there is a volume of air. Okay, In that, this red, which is nitrogen, oxygen, and CO2, argon, and etc. These white color particles or molecules, they are water vapor. So when we use this absolute humidity, because absolute humidity as a dimensions, okay, it is nothing but vapor density. So this is the one pocket here, okay, its volume is 2 meter cube, and the mass of vapor in this pocket is 10 grams. Therefore the absolute humidity is equal 5 gram per meter cube, that is 10 into 10 power minus 3 by 2. No, sorry, 10 by, this is in gram per meter cube, okay, 5 gram per meter cube. And similarly, since it is related to volume, this air volume can be compressed. So when it is compressed, still the mass is same. Okay. So but its volume decreased. Its volume is now 1 meter cube, whereas the mass of H2O vapor is 10 grams. Okay. So the absolute humidity is 10 gram per meter cube. So then specific humidity. So specific humidity is mass of water vapor by total mass of air. Okay. So when because this is a kind of a ratio, so it is nothing to do with the dimensions. Uh, it doesn't matter whether the air is compressed or expanded. So you can see that in this pocket, the mass of total this moisture, which includes vapor and as well as dry air, that is equal to 1 kg, whereas mass of H2O vapor is equal 1 gram. Then the specific unit is 1 gram by kg. And suppose if it is compressed, even compressed, the mass of air pocket doesn't change. So same weight, same mass as 1 kg, and the mass of H2O vapor is 1 gram, and its specific humidity is equal 1 gram by kg. Okay, so we are more interested in specific humidity because volume of air always changes due to the surrounding pressure and temperatures. But therefore, we are more interested in using specific humidity. Anyway, so this we don't need this water mixing ratio. So vapor pressure, you see that this is an air pocket, okay, which has because you know air has 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, and other gases they constitute to 1%. Other gases are such as argon, CO2, and etc. Okay, so uh, this air pocket which has water vapor, okay, that's shown with white things. Then dry air, that is shown as red and this green color. So according to Dalton's law, the total pressure exerted by this air, that is equal to partial pressures of each gaseous component, I mean summation of partial pressures of all components. So the total pressure P is equal P of N2 plus P of O2, P of this is argon, okay, uh, P of plus P of H2O. So this is a small question for you. The partial pressure of H2O. Suppose what is the H2O vapor pressure if 1% of air is H2O. Suppose the total air pressure is 1 bar, then how to calculate what is the partial pressure of H2O or H2O air pressure? That is equal to 1 by 100 into 1 bar, because the partial pressures of these different gas components are their mole fractions. Okay, according to the uh, weights, according to masses. So, so in this question, we know that H2O is 1% of air, and we know the air pressure is 1 bar. Then we can get the vapor pressure of H2O. That is nothing but 1 by 100 into total pressure. I mean, that is 1 bar. So 1 by 100 into 1 bar. That is 0.01 bar. Then there are other important terms. Uh, Saturation vapor pressure, PS. Okay. So because if that air pocket it cannot take any more water, then we can say that it is saturated. Okay. So in this when that air pocket is saturated with water vapor, then the partial pressure of H2O is called as saturated water pressure, saturated vapor pressure. So this is another important term. This is very important term called relative humidity. So it is shown by RH. It is also represented by QV. In the next slides, I will show it is represented by QV. So this RH is equal water vapor by water vapor capacity. So if it is 100%, RH is 100%, then it is air is saturated. Okay, saturated air is example is clouds, fog, and rain. Then if RH is less than 100%, then the air is not saturated. If RH is more than 100%, the air is supersaturated. Okay, this is a rare phenomena because for condensation, there are few nuclei are required. Okay, then only the condensation takes place. Okay, sometimes at very high altitudes, like in stratosphere, where the of course the pressure is low, but it is very clean air, and there this more than 100% saturation can happen because there is no nuclei, no dust particles for precipitation available.